On today's episode, we talk about the power of asking and answering good questions when it comes to figuring out what to do in water-sensitive urban design. Before we get into this, a quick clarification. When I recorded this episode, I quoted a couple of figures from a specific local government. I didn't identify the local government, but I used figures specific to a local government. In hindsight, I don't think that was the best idea. There's a few reasons for that, but one of them is because the figures were so precise, they were unnecessarily precise to convey the story here. So I've chosen to remove them from the episode, but for this to make sense, you still need a ballpark of what those figures are. So what I've chosen to do is I've removed those figures from the episode, and I want to now, before we get started, give you a couple of replacement figures so that you are in the ballpark, but not overly pulled down the path of those particular very precise figures. So, when you hear me in this episode, give a figure for how much of the city is currently treated by stormwater treatment assets. I want you to think of approximately a bit less than 5% of the city. When you hear me make an estimate of how long under current policies at current rates it would take to treat the entire city, I want you to think of over 200 years. Now these are figures that I've used in previous episodes to make points such as this, and so I want you to go with those. So the two numbers are less than 5% of the city treated and more than 200 years. One more clarification though. With that less than 5% number, that could be interpreted a few different ways. So let's make this really crystal clear. What that number is, how much of the city, so how much of the urban footprint is in this instance treated to the standards set out in the Queensland State Government's state planning policy. Now for anyone not from Queensland, that's a fairly robust policy that includes sediment, nutrients and gross pollutants and reduction targets for those. It doesn't achieve sustainable loads for our waterways, but it is a fairly robust target and it's a well understood standard. So when we say how much of the city, less than 5% of the city is currently treated, what we're saying is less than 5% of the city is treated to the standard in the state planning policy. That doesn't mean that there might not be other areas in the city that might have some lower level of treatment, and that's what you need to be aware of here. So three things: less than 5%, more than 200 years, and that is the standard. The less than 5% is to the standard of the Queensland Government state planning policy. Okay, that's the end of the clarifications. Let's get into the episode. Stories about water and urban places. This is Ideanthro. Hey everyone, and welcome back to Ideanthro. On today's episode, I would like to share with you several questions and the answers to those questions, several questions that I had the opportunity, along with some colleagues, to ask in a particular project for a particular local government just recently that were particularly useful in framing up my thinking about, okay, if this is where we're at with water-sensitive urban design, what should we do next? And the thing about these questions is a couple of them are questions that have, been kicking around, been asked a little bit, been answered before. But one of them in particular was a bit of a, never actually thought to ask that question. And when we did, it really reframed where we should be focusing our efforts in heading towards this water-sensitive city, heading towards no longer having stormwater have impacts upon our waterways. So let me get into this. There's several questions here. Let's go for it. The first question is a fairly obvious one. There are numerous journal articles and publications, conference papers looking at this. And the first one's really simple. It's not simple to answer. What do our waterways actually need us to do with stormwater or not do with stormwater if that stormwater is not going to have an impact upon those waterways? Essentially, what do our waterways need to be healthy? What do they need from stormwater to be healthy? And the specific answer to that, like the nuances of that aren't important to this. But what does come back is, look, if we want our urban waterways to be healthy, we need to mitigate the impacts of really particularly stormwater hydrology, like water quantity, which is really, really tough, and also stormwater quality, the pollution in that stormwater. Now, it's not to say that, depending on the catchment, that urban water pollution is the only type of pollution. Obviously, if you're in a catchment that's got some urban and some rural, there's going to be other sources of that. But the point being that if you have an urban catchment that has a waterway that you want to keep that waterway in some kind of resemblance of a natural and nice condition or a healthy condition, from a stormwater point of view, you need to be managing both hydrology and water quality, and we need to be doing a lot of it. Not just a little. It's not like a case of, oh, we'll just treat a little bit of the water over there and we won't worry about the hydrology. It's like, we need to do a lot. We need to go a long way to resetting the impacts of that urbanization. That's fairly straightforward. That probably doesn't come as a shock to anyone listening to this. The second question that's asked a lot is, okay, well, we've been building stormwater treatment assets, because remember, we're asking this for a local government, and a local government that had been trying to mitigate the impacts of its stormwater for quite some time. So the question was then, well, what treatment assets have we built already? So, yeah, they're bioretention systems, they're wetlands, how many of them are there, how big are they? Those sorts of questions. That question, a lot of people have asked that before as well. The third question has also been asked a lot, and that question is, well, how much do those assets cost, and how much are they costing us to maintain? A lot of councils have asked that. The numbers are often quite big and quite scary, particularly in comparison to the maintenance budgets that we already have. So you often find that, oh, the budget we have is this, but the amount we need is this. Oh, there's a bit of tension there. None of those questions are new. And it's for asking those very, very, very specific, those particular questions that are leading to current policies that we see in the place. They lead to policies that ask new development to treat stormwater. They lead to policies where some local governments take money from development to build off-site solutions elsewhere. Those sorts of questions have framed up current policy. But it was the fourth question that we asked that, for me, really gave some clarity towards, how should we be dealing with this? Because the current situation, as it's very, very, very often looked at here, is, okay, we've been treating stormwater, like it's often the assets, it's often questions 2 and 3. What assets do we have and how much do they cost that are currently framing up thinking about what to do about water-sensitive urban design? And those questions are typically answered with, we have quite a lot of assets and they're costing us more to maintain than we want them to do. Is there a way that we can maybe not do that? Oh, we could take offsets and spend elsewhere. We could do regional systems. But when we add in a little bit of the first question, which is actually, if we want healthy waterways, we need to do a lot of stormwater treatment. And the answer to the fourth question, for me, it reframed things up very clearly and a little bit differently to that. And so what's the fourth question? The fourth question is, for all these assets that we currently have, how much of our city do they currently actually treat? Think about that for a second. Have you actually sat down and done the numbers and you're going, we've been building all these bioretention systems and wetlands or rainwater tanks or whatever you happen to be building in your area, swales, infiltration systems, permeable paving, whatever it is, we've been building all of these systems. How much of the city does what we've built already actually treat? Because that can really reframe, well, okay, if we're, for example, if we're thinking, oh my goodness, we've got so many assets, there's so many of them to maintain. Well, if that large number of assets that costs a lot to maintain is treating lots of the city, then maybe just finding ways to spend that money in different areas is good. We can rejig it and we can optimize. But on the other hand, if we're actually at the moment only treating a very, very, very tiny percentage of the city at the moment, that reframes this in a different way. And the answer for this particular local government was how much of the city are we currently treating to legislated standards was, drum roll please, percent of the city. Only percent of the city. This is after arguably at least a decade of implementing stormwater treatment policies in new development in this particular local government. That's not uncommon. Lots of local governments have been doing this for about that length of time. Only 2.8% of the city. Then extrapolating forward on current asset creation rates, we were just like, let's just do a quick sum. At the current rate, how long will it take us to treat the whole city? And the answer to that is years. So this immediately sets up a dichotomy. Yeah, you heard that right. Years, i.e. times the length of time that the Australian nation as it currently stands, obviously long history of Australia, but the nation as a nation times the length that the nation has existed to date. Years in the context of Australia as it currently is, not in its long history, but in the context of what it currently is, times that is a really long time. It's an unacceptably long time, because if you recognise that most of the damage that we've done to urban waterways has happened in 120 years, we're going to suddenly take times that long to undo it. It's ridiculously too long. It's unacceptably too long. So when we combine that with the fact that, okay, if we actually want to mitigate the impacts of urbanisation on waterways, we really need to do lots of stormwater treatment all over the place, lots of mitigating stormwater hydrology. And you combine that with the fact that we currently have quite a few assets and they probably cost us more to maintain than we want. But we then combine that with the fact that they're still only getting us 20% of the city, and at the current rate it's going to take years. It really quickly reframes up the problem here, that whatever we do differently, because clearly the current paradigm's not working in that context, whatever we do differently needs to essentially solve three problems. It needs to address way more it needs to do stormwater, lots and lots of stormwater treatment. It needs to do it on the whole city, not just 10% of the city, but it needs to expand out far, 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 far wider. So the areas that it does treat, so let's go back to these 3 points. The areas that it does treat, it needs to treat to a really high standard. It actually needs to treat lots and lots and lots of the city, so more than just 2.8%, but like the whole city, every part of the city. And thirdly, it needs to do it for way cheaper than it currently does. Yes, those are diametrically opposed, right? We need to do more, it needs to cost less. But the point is that when you actually sit down and recognize that and take a deep breath, after you've had the panic attack where you've gone, oh dear, after you've had the oh dear moment, and take a deep breath, it actually provides a lot of clarity, at least in my mind, for what we as policymakers, engineers, architects, landscape architects, whoever your role in this, or whoever and whatever your role in this industry and your interest in this field is, it actually provides a lot of clarity, because it should just say to us, whatever we do next needs to deal with those two factors. Do more, do it everywhere, do more, spend less. Everything we should be doing in this space should fit under those two guiding principles. Do more, spend less. They might be diametrically opposed, but they are still the guiding principles. Because if we don't hit both of them, we will fail. Because think about it this way. Let's assume we go for the path that just says, okay, we need to spend less, so we're just going to spend, only what we can afford, and we'll accept that we're just going to do less. Well, guess what? We won't get healthy waterways. Flip it around the other way, and if we say, okay, right, no, we need to do it everywhere. Do it everywhere, everywhere, everywhere. Who cares about the cost? Do it everywhere. You know what? Eventually the cost is going to get too much, and it's going to bite us up the backside, and we're going to stop doing it everywhere. And we're still not going to get healthy waterways because we'll have failed on the cost side of things, right? The reality is, if you want healthy waterways, from an urban stormwater point of view, we need to mitigate lots and lots of the impacts, so we need to do it for less money. And we can use that then to analyze and to frame up any option or any possible policy or any possible project or any possible innovation, and see whether it fits under those two categories, whether it's heading towards that. Maybe it doesn't deliver upon both of them right now, but maybe it's heading towards them. And we can use that to evaluate whether it's a good idea. So let's look at this. Let's look at a couple of examples. So one option would be status quo. So in Queensland, the vast majority of mitigating the impacts of stormwater happens because local governments tell new development that it needs to treat its stormwater. Let's assess just continuing with the status quo under this situation. Well, if we continue with the status quo, what we're going to get is this. We do have steadily escalating costs here, and the reality is we already have more assets than most local governments are funding to maintain. So we've kind of already, even without doing this for say another 10 years, we've kind of already failed on the cost side of the equation. On the flip side though, At the current rates of that local government that I provided the example for, where they're only treating 50% of the city so far, and it's going to take another 4 years. Yeah, we have confidence that we went down to 1 year. Clearly that was just a bit of round off or lack of rounding going on there. But the point is, it's going to take 50 odd years to get. So it's failed on the treat lots and treat everywhere point of view as well. If you then dig deeper into that policy and realize that it won't ever actually lead to the whole city being treated, then it just outright fails there. So the current paradigm, good first step though it was, fails on both counts. It's not going to be the long-term solution to water-sensitive urban design and to a water-sensitive future from a stormwater point of view in our cities. No questions, no arguments, it will not be the future. So let's look at another future. Let's look at stormwater offsets as they're currently. Yeah, I know, anyone who's watching these videos know that I don't like them, but it's a paradigm that at least we can all visualize at the moment because several local governments are trying it. Let's look at stormwater offsets. So the current way they're being practiced is they're saying, hey, new developer, you are going to build something on your site anyway. Why don't you give us, the local government, the money, and we'll do something equivalent elsewhere. So we look at that and we go, well, okay, where these local governments, they're spending, sometimes they're taking that money and building like regional water-sensitive urban design treatment systems. And sometimes they're taking it elsewhere in the urban area, maybe doing creek rehab, creek naturalization, and sometimes they're taking it elsewhere, like into rural areas and doing, creek rehabilitation, nutrient abatement projects in rural areas. Well, let's look at this. On some aspects on the cost side, this is good because at least on paper, some of those alternative measures get a lot more bang for our buck. So potentially on the cost side, we're able to get at least equivalent outcomes to what we're currently doing, maybe for less money and maybe for less long-term maintenance money. Maybe. But admittedly, we are still building more and more, and the cost savings there, particularly when we look at building, okay, the developer's not going to build it on their site, but we're going to build a regional system. The cost savings for regional systems are not particularly large, right? They don't actually save a lot of money compared to individual systems scattered around the landscape. So on that basis, like, offsites may be doing something to cost, but probably not the step change that we need to happen if we're going to really drive costs down while driving outcomes up. Then we look at the outcome side of this and go, well, if we care about urban waterways, we need to mitigate all the impacts of urbanisation upon waterways. Well, taking some of the money, noting that the new development to date in a particular local government that we're using as an example here has in 10 years, maybe a little more, only delivered 10% of the city being treated. The concept, and it's going to take another years at that rate to deliver it, well, the concept of just using developers' money to do stuff elsewhere in the catchment or build regional systems, clearly this, like the scale of that, unless it's making a step change in technology over here, which it's not particularly because we're just building regional systems, then we're not doing it broadly and widely enough. If you combine in the fact with offsets that there are typically really, really, really limited locations where you can actually build them, like there might be 10 years supply worth, but there's not years worth of supply, right? So eventually we're just going to run out of regional treatment system sites without having got anywhere near treating the entire urban area. Alternatively, you could look at options where people are offsetting into the upper catchments, but of course then they're just not treating the hydrologic impacts of stormwater on our urban areas, so we're still not going to get nice urban waterways. So offsets, make a step in the right direction, tinker with some stuff, do some good stuff, but ultimately under this paradigm of do more, spend less, they fail as well, as they're currently being practiced. It's not to say they couldn't be iterated upon. In the same way, it's not to say that the current paradigm of developers doing stuff on site might not be part of the long-term solution and couldn't be iterated upon either. So then for me, it frames it up as, well, what might be the answer to this? And for me, where I personally am focusing my current attention is really on two particular areas. It's on developing really low cost stormwater treatment, stormwater mitigation measures. So examples of this that have taken a step in the right direction is like Manningham City Council's ZAM WUSD measures that we've looked at in some previous episodes. So on the one hand, it's like, how do we create lower cost treatment systems? And then on the other hand, for me, where I'm really interested at the moment is how do we piggyback implementation onto existing programs through so that there's zero additional effort. So it's going, okay, we would have been doing something here anyway, upgrading a road, building some landscaping. We are going to, through a really simple measure, take one of these lower maintenance, easy type systems and implement it through an existing program, piggyback on an existing program, so that we can implement something woosed for zero additional effort. For me, that's where the interest and the focus is at the moment. But it's by bringing this right back around to the start, that it's by answering the right questions, asking the right questions and then answering them. And it's funny because that fourth question of how much of the city have we actually treated and how long is it going to take to treat the rest of the city? By answering that question, which had been sitting under my nose for years, I can't believe that after 7 years of thinking about topics somewhat related to this, although I did not have the clarity when I started as to what to think about and how, but it does surprise me that it took 7 years to actually sit down and go, let's just check how far we're getting with this. And so this really brings us back to the start. The power of sitting there and asking and then answering the right questions. And so for me, the lesson that I've taken away from this is, when we're trying to solve this, what questions could be hiding in plain sight? Things that we might have made assumptions about in the past, things that we might not have considered the way they should have been, things that things that are sitting there in plain sight that we should have got some data on, asked a few questions about, and then used that to reframe our approach going forwards. I'm sure, or I'm not sure, I hope that in the future I'm going to continue to be able to identify questions that should be asked like this, and then that will reframe my thinking going forwards. And maybe in the future, maybe in 6 months, I'll be making another video that's going, 6 months ago, I was saying to you that because of these 4 questions, I'd realized that the challenge was between need to do more and spend less. But because I've just answered questions 5 and 6, who knows what 5 and 6 are, but because I've just answered 5 and 6, now I think it's do more, spend less, and whatever it is. I don't know what that is, but it's by looking for questions hiding in plain sight and answering them that I think we can continue to get more and more clarity about where we need to focus our attention in water-sensitive urban design. And that is it for this episode. I would be very, very interested to hear what you think of that. Actually, I'd be more interested to know if you have ideas for what questions 5 and 6 should be. What questions are hiding in plain sight about our current practice, our current implementation, maybe our future implementation of stormwater management and water-sensitive urban design that we should answer to inform what our future implementation should be? That is what I would like to know. That is the question to end this episode. Let me know. We will see you soon. Thank you for tuning in. Have a good one. Before you go, our best episodes come from your questions. This knowledge base, these discussions that are Ideanthro improve with your contribution. So if there's a topic, an idea, a concept that you would like us to explore, come and ask us. You know where to find us. www.ideanthro.com/contact. You can find us on Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn, and that place you get your good podcasts from. You know where to find us. We look forward to hearing from you. We'll see you soon.